Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to our premiere episode of Civic Yarn, connecting stories from town meeting to the Golden Dome. In this series, we will be hearing firsthand experiences of public officials and elected officials from across the state about their time in their positions. And some of these stories will be meaningful, some may be heartfelt, and some may just prove that Vermont really is like nowhere else. I am your host, Olga Peters, and I want to welcome to the show today two leaders new to their positions this year. Jill Krowinski, who is the Speaker of the House. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
And Senate Pro Tem, Senator Becca Balint. Nice to have you, Becca.
Nice to see you, Olga.
So, for those who don't know, both Jill and Becca were nominated. How would you say that actually? Is it appointed? Elected to your positions this session in 2021. And while Jill has served in the House since 2012, and Becca, I believe you've served in the House since 2014. I mean the Senate, sorry. These leadership positions were brand new to helm these two bodies in a pandemic.
Although, Olga, we both were majority leaders together.
So we worked for 4 years together in those roles. Yeah. So that was a huge help of getting us organized and prepared for this session, having worked together for so long and knowing each other's styles. And I think that was super helpful and having us have a strong start.
Yeah.
So for folks who may not know much about those positions, could you briefly describe what each of your position does, and what were some of the skills you've learned since you've taken on those leadership positions?
Wow, that's a great question. So the Speaker of the House, as I said, it is an elected position. So in January, we held an election, and I was really grateful.
But elected by your fellow House members,
by the House, members of the House.
Voters of the
That's
public,
right. And so after working closely with members for that election, I was really honored to be the only candidate for Speaker and to have support from all parties in this role. And moving forward, it was really important to me to work collaboratively across party lines because we were in such a historic time. Yeah. So that meant working together on committee assignments, working together on what bills we would prioritize throughout the session, and working together with the caucus leadership to ensure that we had really strong lines of communication open because we weren't in the same space together. And so that just meant that we had to have a little bit more trust and a lot more communication to ensure that everybody was working from the same place and understanding what the plan was and what the timing was. And I will say, our first day in office was unbelievable. We had a really strong morning, and we felt so great coming together.
Flying high.
We were in the chamber together with the lieutenant governor when we found out about what was happening in Washington, and it just changed the entire dynamic of just being horrified and outraged and wanting to find a path to express what we were feeling. And at the time, we weren't even sure if they were talking about the State House or the Capitol for a couple seconds. Yes. And so what I thought was pretty remarkable was within 24 hours, 48 hours, we were able to pass resolutions working with all caucus leaders condemning the insurrection at the Capitol and calling on the president to resign or to be removed from office. And if you would have told us that would have been our second day working together, it was just unbelievable. And it just really changed, I think, the dynamic of, okay, we need to get through this pandemic. We need to work on a recovery plan that leaves no one behind, and building that work together. And then to have what happened in Washington really just, I think, changed the landscape for us and how we had to bring our chambers together to work through that and process it. So it was a pretty unique start for us in our roles.
Yeah. How about you, Becca?
Yeah, so I want to pick up on something that the speaker said, which I think highlights sort of the delicate dance that we do in our jobs. So we have to work together. We have to try to work as best we can with whoever is governor. Right now it's a governor of opposing political party, which is always an interesting dynamic. We have to work with our chairs. We have to work with our chambers. And then there are these things that come up that are outside of our control, even outside of the state of Vermont, that impact the work that we're doing. And that was a really perfect example that Jill illustrated there, that we thought we knew what the job would be going in those first week. Like, we've got to do these things. There's the procedural stuff that you have to do to get everybody sworn in, to make sure that, they were working entirely remotely.
Right. Does everyone know how to use Zoom?
Right. Does everyone know how to use Zoom? And, the speaker can talk about that more, about what it means to train 150 people on Zoom versus 30. And so, but so that the short term, the long term, what's happening in the chamber, what's happening in the state, what's happening nationally that's going to impact what we're doing in the state. It is, it's a constant dance. I would say it's like juggling and dancing at the same time. And the challenge is to make sure we are taking care of our senators or House members, making sure we're keeping them informed about what's going on, and also doing our jobs, because we still represent our people back home, right? So it's a multifaceted job, and I feel really grateful that I get to work with Jill, because we had a relationship going in. We have similar values, and I think that makes it much easier to be facing not just a pandemic emergency, an economic emergency, but also this insurrection, which I think really did, as Jill said, it really colored the work that we did, because under the surface of the day-to-day work, we knew one of the things that we had to do was reinstill some confidence and faith in democracy. And I know it's something that is important to you, and it is absolutely fundamental to the work that we do every day, is to make sure people see what good governance looks like, and that our government in Vermont is functioning well. So,
well, I'm so glad you said that, Becca, and Jill, for bringing up January 6th, because one thing I find interesting is, in the theme of stories, we have very personal government in Vermont. We see our lawmakers at the gas station, at the grocery store. We ask them pandemic questions.
We do.
I think that was aisle 5, Becca.
Yes.
And so we have this narrative of really close personal government. And yet we also have this narrative in Vermont, but I think in the country as a whole, that government is this faceless, nameless, detached thing.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, how have those two stories shown up for you in your roles? And can you share any moments where maybe you had to navigate either of those, or maybe both of them at once?
Well, so I think it comes up pretty much almost every day, the tension when we open our emails. And there you can see a national narrative coming into our discussions about just about anything, whether it is about the vaccine rollout, whether it is about the security of elections. And, I don't know if you feel the same way, Jill. I feel like I'm constantly having to do education on a very fundamental level. So just taking elections, for example, teaching Vermonters, whether it's through email or social media posts or on the phone, you do understand that your town clerk is overseeing the election in their town. So when you talk about these corrupt election officials, like, that is not what's actually happening in your town or your city here in Vermont. And elections are decided, state by state, town by town, and that fundamental disconnect of stop the steal, there was corruption, there was, voting machines, and, of course, most towns in Vermont don't have, those kind of voting machines. So it is this constant, this is clearly coming from a national platform, the robo emails. Is it going to be worth it to try to engage with this person? How far are they in the national dialogue? Is there still room for me to say, I know this is your fear, but let me tell you what it looks like in Vermont, or there was a very big push a few weeks ago around that we were going to demand a vaccine passport in Vermont. Never came up. There was no bill on it. That was a no-go on so many fronts, and yet I was getting so many emails and calls about that. And we have only a finite amount of time. We're citizen legislators, and it's tough because we can't. I feel like we can't, and when I mean we, I mean my whole chamber. If you imagine them sitting behind me, people can't keep up with emails and phone calls. They just can't. It has gotten to this fevered pitch of anxiety and worry, and we want to try to alleviate that. And it's a constant gauging that I do. Is it worth my time right now to get into this? Or for me to sort of make a robo response back, which is there is no vaccine passport, we're not doing that. And do you experience that same thing?
Yeah, I would say yes on elections, yes on vaccinations.
Yeah.
I would say the other place that I've seen it a lot, and I represent the Old North End in downtown Burlington, is the fear for people of color and what they have seen come out of this visceral language
Absolutely.
from the conservative right, and for, frankly, some moderates who have not stepped up and have sort of stepped back and in this vacuum let this narrative take over. And it's really hard, and I do everything I can, and I know Becca does too, to show up, to say, these are our values, and we are going to do work. We've been doing work. We're going to continue to do work around racial justice and social equity, and we will continue to do this, and we will continue to push back, and we will raise our voices. And that part, to me, that is one of the things that keeps me up at night, because there's this instability and this fear out there, and I'm constantly wondering, am I saying enough? Am I out there more? And and that's while trying to balance all of the other things and making sure, is this the right statement at the right time? And so, and I know that like our leadership teams also have that same balance and tension and debate about where we're focusing our time, because we have limited time and resources. So I'm proud of the work that we did this session around racial justice and social equity. I think we will continue to do this work. This is not ending. This is only growing and becoming a bigger part of what we do. But I would say those are the three things that I think I've seen elevated and more tension around because of January 6th.
And one of the processes that bills go through is quite often there is a time when the House or the Senate or the committee in charge of whatever bill's being worked on takes testimony. And so you often hear from Vermonters, lobbyists, a whole host of people. Looking back at this last session, were there any conversations or moments of testimony that you sat in on that has really stayed with you and impacted you as a lawmaker?
So as the speaker, I am not assigned to a committee, so this is where our roles are a little different. But I do go back and watch or read about testimony when there's a certain bill that we're trying to keep an eye on because it's a top tier priority. But one that has stuck out with me that didn't get a lot of press, but I think it was really important, is with expanding Dr. Dinosaur benefits to no matter what your immigration status is in Vermont. And hearing some of the moms speak about their heartbreak in that one of their children was born, from their home country, one was born here, and one has access to great health care and one doesn't. And just talking about how hard it was to make a decision about how this child has different and less access, and how grueling and heartbreaking those decisions were. And that's unbelievable. That should not be. That does not reflect our values. That does not reflect where we want to be in Vermont. And so I was really proud that we were able to pass that bill and the governor signed it. Like I said, it didn't get much press, but it's going to make a big difference for those families. And it's those stories that I always carry with me, is those personal stories of how people are trying to do their best and get ahead, and there are these barriers that are just not their fault. And I'm glad that we were able to take action on bills like that to make sure that all kids have access to health care.
Thank you. Becca, how about you?
Yeah, so the Pro Tem position also sits on 2 committees. And so I sit on economic development and housing in the morning and appropriations in the afternoon. And there are so many things that I could talk about right now. But 2 things that are top of mind for me are the housing bill that we worked really hard to pass, a bill that we've been working on actually for years.
Is this S79?
S79, which the governor did veto. And we have many Vermonters across Vermont living in substandard housing. And they're paying too much for it, and they don't have a good system to turn to make sure that they are being protected from this. And it's something that we both feel really strongly about, which is why we took it up at the veto session. It is not acceptable for that situation to continue. So we will continue to work on this, and we'll live to fight another day. But I came to this work having been a teacher for many years, and had students in my classroom who I knew were impacted in their ability to learn by the housing that they lived in.
Right.
People who come in having lived in moldy or drafty places, and it impacts their learning because it impacts their health. And so this is I know I've gone a little bit away from your question, which was testimony, but when we hear that testimony, again, not just from the people living in those that substandard housing, but also all of the organizations that represent those people who say, we've been working on this for 10 years or longer. And so, I mean, that's another lesson, I think, for people watching to understand. It can take a very, very long time to get legislation passed. So that's one thing that I've been thinking about a lot this week. The other is the testimony we heard around the Vermont State Colleges and how important the Vermont State Colleges are to people who see themselves as sort of non-traditional students, whether they are Vermonters who graduate from high school and never imagine that they're going to go on to college, or they want to get a certification but they're not quite sure sort of how to get their foot in the door to higher ed if they don't come from a family that has that in their background. And so certainly a lot of the testimony that we took about the Vermont State Colleges really spoke to that and why it was important to have a footprint in those communities, because people need to feel like it's accessible to them, not just financially, but also emotionally, psychologically, that it's closer to home. I can see myself doing this. So,
So I would love to hear both of you talk about and describe the moment you decided to run for office. And once you made that decision, what were your next steps?
Well, my path was a little different from Becca's because I was actually appointed to my seat. So the woman who was serving at the time, Representative Rachel Weston, got this amazing job opportunity abroad and called me to say that she was going to be resigning and said, you should run. And I was like, no, not it. Well, and this is true, right? Like women need to be asked like 6 or 7 times. We know this. That's why I worked for Emerge Vermont to help recruit and train Democratic women to run. I did the same thing years ago, and I said, I'm not ready. I'm not qualified, but let me help you find someone. And through that process, I had a couple more people call and say, what are you doing? Like, this is your time. You are always saying, like, we need more younger women to serve in the legislature. You're ready. And so I went for a really long hike with my partner, and we were talking about what it would mean for our lives and our family, and decided, you know what? that's true. Like I do have what it takes, and I know it's going to be hard, but I love my community. I've been serving in many different ways on many different roles in my community, and I was like, this is the right time. So I threw my hat in, and 6 people went for the endorsement. So it's a whole process. So I
didn't realize that.
Yeah. So we had 6 run, and then 3 names from the local town committee went to the governor, and then Governor Shumlin interviewed the 3 of us and then appointed me. So I was very grateful for the opportunity, and it's been it was definitely the right decision, and I'm just so honored to be able to continue to serve the Old North End in downtown Burlington.
Wow.
And before we move on for Jill, because I think it's really important for people to understand too, like Jill had a lot of experience in the State House prior to when she ran.
That's
so
right.
I just think, especially
so,
for young people out there who want to get in politics, I think it would be important to tell that part of it.
No, thank you for highlighting that. It is true once you start hearing about the different work. I had, before throwing my name in for the state rep race, I had worked on various campaigns to help people get elected. I had worked in the Speaker's office as the assistant to the Speaker of the House.
Wow. Yeah.
And I served for a period of time doing communication and public policy work for Planned Parenthood of Northern New England. So I had experienced every role in that building except as an elected official. And it is true, I was doing that work when I was in my 20s, and I loved it. And what I think was so amazing about it is that people are so open and eager to share their experiences and take on, one of the things that we both care a lot about is creating more opportunities for internships within the State House and within our offices, and really having a robust system available. And we were just talking to Girls State the other day, and it was amazing to talk with all these young women about possibly running or getting involved. And I think that really, it personally recharges me so much to have those opportunities. And so I think, one really important message for people is that don't be afraid. Don't think, this is an important legislature and I can't read it. We want to hear from people and answer questions and bring them in. And it'll be fantastic when we are back in the building and can do that, because it was a little tricky on Zoom, but we did the best we could.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, thank you, because
thank you very much.
I didn't think you knew that, and I wanted.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, and so it is an important part of her history and the experience that she brings there.
Well, and I think people forget, they think if they want to run for office, for them to learn the ropes, that's their only option, is to run directly for office.
Right.
But there are town committees, there's other experience you can get before actually running a campaign.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
So
I served on our library commission for many years. There are
our development review board.
Yep.
Right.
All those things. You get to know your town in a different way. Absolutely. So, in thinking about this question, there's sort of the standard way that I answer it, but I want to actually, partly because poor Olga and Jill have heard this spiel so much, and also because I wanted to sort of pinpoint a time earlier in my life, because I feel like it's sort of a bifurcated process for me. So I remember really clearly I was sitting in an American history class in 11th grade, and Mr. Davis, and he was up on the board, and we were looking at pictures from a Native American reservation out west in Montana. And I remember sitting there, and he was talking about the experience of Native people on that reservation, and like my mind was completely blown. And I said, wait a minute, like, hold on, what are you talking about? Right. And sort of like, please deconstruct this for me. I don't understand how we got to this place. I don't understand how they were essentially placed on these reservations. How did they lose custody of the land? And I remember sitting there thinking, this is so profoundly wrong that I don't know what my path is going to be, but I know there would be something sort of related to that, and sort of alleviating suffering and like seeking justice. And so I mention it because I also knew that later that year, same class, he tapped me to play Geraldine Ferraro in a political convention, and I loved it. And I saw the pictures from it with the wig and the glasses, and I was like, this is fantastic. And so felt like I really enjoyed talking about policy. I really loved, interacting with people, working with my, campaign team. And at that time, I felt like, oh, I really think this is going to be my path. And then at that point was also realizing I was going to be living my life as a gay person at a time when there really weren't out gay politicians or not many that I could look to. So really put it aside and went instead the path of teaching civics, teaching history, went to get my master's of history and studied Native American land claims. Like picked up that thread of how did we get here? And what can I do with the brain that I have and the passion that I have to make a change? So I taught for many years. As you know, I wrote op-ed in the Brattleboro Reformer for years and really got to thinking about what is the next way for me to amplify the voices of the kids that I had taught, their families, what I saw, and I taught in 3 different communities within Windham County. What can I do to amplify those voices? And it's been an incredible moment for me in the last week, hearing all of the news that's coming out of Canada right now, and they're finally coming to terms with what happened at the Indian boarding schools in Canada. And I turned to my wife the other night, I said, I was researching that in 1994. And then again in 2000. Yeah. And here we are 20 years later still trying to come to terms with that. And so it is, I see the two going hand in hand. My interest in history is very much tied up with my interest in policy and politics. And so I do feel like there were 2 critical moments. So one was that time in high school and another time when I came home from my kids' school in Brattleboro and realized that we had gone from 50% of the kids qualifying to free and reduced lunch to 70%.
Right.
And so that lit a fire under me. And there's so much that we all can do to serve our communities. And I think sometimes we feel like it has to be as public servants in this way. But we all know in every single town, there are dozens of people serving in all these boards, and that's what's holding this state together. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We run on people serving in so many ways that I think this state would probably fall apart without those boards and those commissions and those.
Especially through this pandemic, where people have just stepped up in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's been remarkable.
And when we see what's going to happen at the local level too, with trying to turn around a lot of these funds from the federal government and
the COVID relief funds, you mean?
The ARPA funds, because we don't have. I mean, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but we don't have a county government structure, which is really different from almost every other state. And so that's going to be really interesting to see how our select boards navigate that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up all the other ways people serve, because one of my questions for you is, of all the ways you could serve, why did you choose an elected position? Why did you choose the State House?
Do you want to start?
No, you go ahead.
Well, why did I choose the State House? Well, I had served in many other roles in the community before, and so I had that experience, for example, serving on the Library Commission and doing everything we could to expand access to all kids in Burlington. I have done a lot of work around reproductive justice work, and I saw this coming at my work at Planned Parenthood, but the onslaught that we saw coming on reproductive rights really sparked something in me. You know, when I was working at Planned Parenthood, the first debate that I came into was around protesters at our Burlington Health Center and people around the state not knowing that there were health centers that patients did not feel comfortable going into because they were being harassed.
Right.
The fact that, access to birth control and then everything under the Trump administration, like what was to come, I could see what the path was starting to happen when it came to reproductive rights across the country. And just like so many things, your zip code determines so much for what access to services and education and housing. And for me, that always just lit this fire in my belly of I have to be a voice. I have to be someone on the lookout, because I felt that at the time in the State House, there were very strong advocates for reproductive rights, and we always felt that we were in a safe space. And as soon as Kavanaugh was appointed to the courts, we came together. I'm so passionate about this. I'm going a little off your question here, but this was a place where, I had this moment. I was knocking on doors with a candidate, and we walked up to this door, and this woman was crying, and she's like, "I'm watching these hearings, and I can't believe this is where our country is." And we just had this conversation about what's going to happen to reproductive rights and everything from birth control to abortion access. And it just hit me that we have to act. And it was just from that conversation and others like that sparked us last biennium to say we need to take action and be proactive to protect rights. And so we passed a short-term bill to protect access, and we are in the process of getting a constitutional change to make sure that those rights are protected. And that took years of work to get to this place. But it's because of those conversations, knocking on that door at that time, conversations with women who were at the forefront of women's health 20, 30 years ago, who were like having these conversations in kitchens. Is this the time? Do we need to act? And it was just a really incredible policy project to be involved with, and a movement to be involved with, even though people think that we live in a really safe place. But I think, again, this is where we're seeing this, the impact that the federal government and the Supreme Court does have on our state.
So, Jill, given the work you did at Planned Parenthood and the work you're doing now as speaker, what did you feel at the point you decided, yes, I'm going down this elected path, this elected official path, even though you were nominated? You've since run campaigns. What did you feel that work could do that maybe working out of Planned Parenthood of Northern New England didn't do or couldn't accomplish?
I think at the end of the day, it came down to being able to pass legislation that would change the course of people's lives in a way that I couldn't do standing outside that health center trying to protect patients walking in, and to think there's a bigger way, a bigger process out there that I can be involved in to help shape that, and to lend my background and my experiences, which are different, and you bring your own unique background too, to a place that can lead and bring people together to get hard things done. And I really struggled with the decision about whether to run for speaker or not. And I did have this moment where I could see bringing people together on the floor, and I could see bringing people together around shared goals for how we get through this pandemic. And I think a lot of that came from my work at Planned Parenthood that helped give me some of those skills of having tough conversations and being willing to talk to people who don't share your values to find what is our common ground? What do we agree on? And let's start there. And I think that has really stuck with me through my leadership and speakership as well.
Thank you. How about you, Becca?
There's so much that Jill just said that resonates with me. And I don't want to also lose this moment to say we both feel really proud of that work that we did. And it really is a beacon for the nation around reproductive health. So it's kind of a strange question, why do any of us choose the paths we do? And also, what is the story that we tell ourselves about why, right? And so, and those stories change. And so I was thinking about that. And
thank you for picking up on that.
So, basic level, I have, for whatever reason, I have always felt a calling to public service. And so then there's the question of like running for office, and then there's the question of, running running to be pro tem.
Right.
And so I think I'll concentrate on running to be pro tem, because I similar to Jill, which is you have to do a lot of self-reflection of, am I the right person for this body? Am I the right person, the body meaning the chamber, the right person at this time in what we're facing? And certainly, I'm human, so I have, moments of doubt and then moments of confidence, and it goes back and forth. And I remember a mentor saying to me, do you think you have the skills to help these people do their best work? Do you have the skills as a teacher? Do you have the skills as a facilitator? I also was between when I left teaching and when I ran for office, I was trained as a coach. And so a personal coach in terms of like asking the right questions at a critical moment to get people to think about something differently. And she said to me, so you're asking the wrong question. The question that I want to ask you is, you have all these skills. Who are you not to run? It seems kind of, in a way, selfish of you to not run when you have some skills that can help them do their work better. And it's like flipping it on its head, and it's hard to get there because what I come up against is, gosh, like, who am I to do this, right? And so that helps me in those moments of doubt even today, which is, no, I do know how to facilitate a good conversation. I love people. I'm not afraid of hard conversations. And so I can lean in and sort of hold space when I know it's hard for other people to do that. And I feel like my job right now at this time is to help us just get to a better place. And then the next person who comes in is going to hopefully help get us to that next spot. That Jill and I, we're here at this time to do the best that we can do with the skills that we have and the people there. And the beauty or the tragedy of Vermont politics is every 2 years, everybody runs. And that's a thing I think a lot of Vermonters don't understand. From the governor on down, every elected position at the state level is running every 2 years. And that means you never know who's going to be in the chamber. You have, of course, some idea in terms of incumbency, but there is
we tend to re-elect incumbents.
We do, but there always is some churn.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I like to think about and highlight for my senators, which is the old adage, which is the only constant is changed. That is. And that, yes, this is how it was a year ago, or 18 months ago, but 18 months ago we didn't have the pandemic. And so the whole frame has shifted. And that's terrifying, and that is also opportunity, always. And
so walk us through, each of you, any time in your career. This can be a moment from any time when you had to flex your leadership muscles, and kind of walk us through that, and what that moment taught you.
And I know we're both going through the stories of what we can and can't say out loud.
I think, this was,
do we need to like put the little
blur out your
bag,
faces,
change your name?
That's right.
So, I mean, I think, when I think about like our leadership styles and the challenges that we face, I also think about the opportunities. And that has been a theme, I think, for us this whole session, and thinking about the pandemic and the incredible amount of federal relief funds that we have. And are we taking every opportunity? And that has been always in the back of my mind in every conversation. What are we missing? We can't go back to the way things are done. We have to use this moment in time to create real change. And that's when I think about these conversations one-on-one with members, talking about, well, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do around Vermont State Colleges? What are we going to do around housing, broadband? And, there were moments throughout these conversations where a member said, I just wish we could do that. And I said, well, why not? Why not? Tell me why we couldn't do that. And really looking for those little nuggets and those little moments to take, because we have so many smart and talented legislators who bring such a diverse background and experiences to our chambers. And, I really worked hard to seek out those moments. And, it was a moment around higher education. We were just saying, how do we help our kids? And how do we help our small rural communities who are struggling? And we all of a sudden started this whole conversation around free tuition and grants and supporting paid internships, and it blossomed in committee, and we got it through our chambers and through the governor for a signature. And again, it was like knocking on that door. It was sitting there asking and finding that moment to say, why not, and let's try it, instead of saying that's going to be hard, that we can't do that. And so I think for me, I don't think of it as like wrestling a tough situation, but it's more like finding these unique opportunities in this time and not passing it up, because we are in such a big transition and we have so many opportunities to help people. And again, that's why I'm so disappointed that the governor vetoed our housing bill, because it comes back so much now, especially because of the pandemic, of access to affordable housing. And but that's when I think of using the moment in the speaker's office or using my role, I think about finding those opportunities to elevate new ideas, or say this is going to be hard, but let's think about how we could do it. So that's for me where I went to in hearing that question.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think want to make something that's implicit, that I just want to make it explicit, which is that we are Democratic leaders who are working in the middle of an emergency with a Republican governor who won re-election easily, right? So there is a sense that unlike in many other states, right, we actually have an adult at the wheel here who believes in science, all of those things. But so it sets up this dynamic a little bit for us, which is when there is an area in which perhaps the governor is not actually spot on, right? We sort of have to steel our spines, because we know, well, in the session, at least twice a week, he was having an hour-plus press conference, right? We don't have those kind of resources at our disposal. And so it takes a certain amount of courage in a moment to say, actually, you know what? This is not the right path. And we saw that with the initial plan that we got around the ARPA funds, because it was not focused on human capital.
Right.
It was focused on people capital. It was really about bricks and mortar. And I remember getting a lot of pushback from the press saying, well, why aren't you just adopting his plan? Hasn't he done a great job, with COVID? And I said, well, yeah, that's one area. But I need you to, think critically about what was the language that came down from the federal government when they passed that bill, and what was the language embedded in the actual bill that was turned into law. And we had to just stand firm and say, actually, this can be better. Yes, we will work with the governor, but it can be better. But when you have a phalanx of, press who are saying, why aren't you just adopting his plan? And you have to say, no, I'm here as a representative of my community. I'm here as a representative of my county. And I think they will be better served if actually we expand the frame. And those moments are tough.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So what is the hardest thing about serving in the State House?
And so I just want to ask, for us or for anyone?
For you,
Yeah.
Your experience, what's the hardest thing?
It's really hard to say, because it's a very challenging job. We both feel so grateful that we have the jobs that we do. And also, it's incredibly challenging in a time when we don't have the support, the actual support within the structures in place for us to do a job 365, 24 hours a day. Because that's what's asked of us now. And it sort of has outgrown, the citizen legislature has really outgrown the frame of January to May part-time.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure what to do about that, but I think there is a sense that we have We have staff working for us that are turning emails around or answering phone calls or all of those things. And we want to get back to people in a timely manner. I remember having a meeting with senators partway through the session, and everybody got on the Zoom and they just all looked exhausted. And I said, what's going on? And to a person, they're like, I'm drowning in emails. I feel like a terrible legislator. I can't physically get back to people, and that feels really rotten. And so I think just on a logistical level, people don't feel like they have the resources they need to do the job well. And nobody, I think, wants to do a job they don't feel like they're doing well. And so that's just like the first top of mind thing, that the structures in place don't match the job as it's required now.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Becca and I have
Yeah.
kind of talked about this, Jill, a little bit about Vermont in general, because it operates so much on volunteer,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
volunteer firehouse or whatever, and yet with people's lives being what they are and public policing being so complicated,
Right.
it's hard to find volunteer firefighters. It's hard to find volunteer EMTs. It's hard to find volunteer lawmakers.
And so, and I just don't want to take up too much time, but I want to just, you sort of hinted at it, but I just want to make it, again, I want to make it explicit. What that means is you have to have people in those jobs who
Can afford it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And many legislators have to have other jobs because of the way that the pay is structured. So it's this. It is a disconnect in that you want to have a legislature that is more representative of communities, and yet the structure itself makes that very difficult.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I totally agree with Becca. I mean, there are never enough hours in the day. And I know so many people feel that way in their own lives.
Absolutely.
And
It's not particular to our jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it is just really hard to have to set those lines of what you're going to prioritize, what you're going to delegate, and what you're going to have to let go of. And that's just the nature of it. I think the other thing that's been added on in a layer to this, and this was more so last summer, but I definitely felt it during points of this legislative session where we had so many problems with the Department of Labor and people being able to access their claims. And so it was on top of, all of the work that we needed to get done and responding and to all of the other constituent questions or ask for help. I would get these phone calls of people just crying, saying, I tried, I can't get through, I've been on
calling
the phone.
for 10,
I was on for 6 hours and saying, can you help? And, and you take that time to help that person and to get them through it. And it was like for every one person that I felt I was able to help, I would get 3 more calls.
That's exactly right.
And it was so frustrating and also hard because not only these people were so frustrated, my neighbors were so frustrated and just felt hopeless. And so it wasn't only getting them the support that they needed, but it was helping them through it. And at points I felt like I was acting as a social worker, a case manager, and hoping that I was doing everything I could and saying the right things to help people through it. But even one day I was just like, I have to make a lasagna for this person. I had to literally drop something off at their door because they were just struggling so much. And I just needed to do something to say I can help you with these calls, but my heart, I'm here with you and I want to help you. And
and it doesn't feel like enough.
And it never feels. It never. Thank you. It never feels like enough.
Yeah, and to that point, I heard from in the midst of the Department of Labor struggles on getting out people's benefits. Was in communication with a former student of mine from years ago, and he had moved home to try to take care of his older parents, and he couldn't get his support through unemployment, and lots of really desperate calls and emails, and felt like we were always trying to hand off to the next person within the department that might be able to crack the nut, and I didn't hear from him, and then. Long after we were through the worst of the troubles at DOL, he emailed me. He said, I feel bad. I never got back to you, but you actually did, that last phone call actually did get me to the right person. And I got a similar card from somebody who had to shut down her business in Brattleboro. And same thing, she wrote me a card. She's like, I realized I never thanked you. And I know that there are thousands of those stories. And one thing I want to say that I think is lost sometimes when people say, well, isn't the governor doing a good job, or can't we trust the executive branch? And I always just want to remind people, we have a separation of powers for a reason. And if you choke off the money and the oversight that one branch can have, that's not good for anyone, right? And so I always try to remind people that, yes, this is functioning well now under this person with this staff at this time, but don't you want a robust legislature as well? We need the checks and balances. Right. We see what happens when we don't have that. Yeah. And so, and I think that's also some of the anxiety that we were feeling through this session, coming out of, as we talked about at the beginning, the storming of the Capitol. We want to instill a sense of trust and calm that government is working, and part of that is making sure that we have a balance of powers.
So we are running a little low on time. I could talk to both of you forever and ever.
This has been really fun.
So I want to check in. We've talked about some things that are hard, but what do you love most about what you do?
Oh my gosh, working with the people. I mean, being in this role, I have the opportunity to go out and meet people in a way that I never would be able to, and through that have formed new friendships and new understanding. It helps you open up doors that you would never see. And, I love knocking on doors. That's part of the job, and connecting with people. And it's scary at first, but I found that just like knocking on doors in my district, I'm doing that as speaker. And actually the Pro Tem and I are going to be going on a tour around the state to talk about the relief funds and get input directly from Vermonters about what's working and what's not working in their communities, and how can we use this pot of, I think it's at $600 million. What are those long-term investments that we can make to build back stronger and be stronger? And having conversations with people and hearing those ideas is just really exciting and special. And I think I wouldn't have those same opportunities to meet people and bring people together otherwise. So that's been just such a wonderful experience of getting to work with so many different people.
Thank you, Jill. How about you, Becca?
I mean, similar to Jill, I love people. I love talking with people about what's important to them. And I think too, the beautiful thing about having a citizen legislature is that we're just regular people. We did not, neither one of us grew up, with this being an inevitability about our lives at all. And I think that's true for most people that we serve with. And politics in Vermont, I think, feels much more possible for many people because of that sense of any person can serve their community, because there are always boards and commissions, as we talked about before, and it's possible for any person then to go and make a viable run for House or Senate. And that is just not true in so many states. It really isn't. And so, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And it's something that we've been working on in our roles, to say, what can we do to make it easier for people to run? And for example, we made it clear that you can use campaign money for childcare to cover childcare when you're out on the campaign trail. There are things like that we are continuing to do and to work on to make it easier. But it's this is, again, one of the barriers we face, is that people have to decide whether to keep their job or not, or to go part-time, and it's hard. It's really hard, and I think we have to keep on working at ways to make it more accessible too.
So just very short answers. What do you wish Vermonters overall better understood about the governance in Vermont? And if anyone's thinking of running, what would you say to them? Whether it's for the select board or governor.
Well, I would say to the first point, you know, if there's an issue that you care about, reach out to your legislator. Like again, I said this earlier, we want to hear from you. And I think it can be very intimidating being a witness or participating. And that's something we've been working on, is to make it more welcoming and more comfortable, because it can feel intimidating, but we really want to hear your ideas and your thoughts. So I would say, like, raise your hand, speak up, let us know. And then if you are thinking about running at the local level or any level, reach out to those involved and find out what it entails. And don't think that you don't have the credibility or experience to do it, because you probably do.
Wonderful, thank you. Becca.
And I would say the thing that I would want people to know is that we do the job because we want to serve our towns or our cities. We're there because we love our communities, and we bring our communities with us every time we walk into the State House. We think about our neighbors. We think about our kids' schools. We think about all of those people that we run into, you know, at the store. And so there is an incredible distrust that I feel like is growing out of the tumult we've seen at the federal level. And I know we are working as hard as we can to remind people we do this job because we care about our communities, we care about our towns and our cities, and we want Vermont to be different. We really do. And I don't mean in that like glossy, like Vermont can do no wrong, but like having real conversations about civic engagement are still possible here. And we are going to have to do some serious work over the next few years to make sure that we protect our ability to have those conversations and not have it turn into a horrible screaming brawl that we see in DC a lot of the time. So,
Well, thank you. I want to thank you both so much for joining us today on Civic Yarn. And thank you, Speaker of the House, Jill Krowinski. Thank you, Senate Pro Tem Senator Becca Balint. It was really a pleasure to speak with you today. Where can people find more information if they want to contact you, find more information about you?
Our legislative website has the information to each of our offices, and we're pretty easy to find. So,
and for folks who don't know, Vermont, the government's website is vermont.gov, and you can find links to the legislature.
or you can just Google
all sorts of
Vermont
things.
legislature.
That's right.
That's right.
Google Vermont legislature, it'll come to the homepage, and you can just click in your town or your representative if you know their name, and it's pretty easy once you get there.
Once you get there. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today here on Civic Yarn. I am your host, Olga Peters. To find future episodes of the show, you can head on over to YouTube. They will be there. And I want to send out a huge thank you to Jen and Zach at Orca Media today in Montpelier for opening their studios to us. And I also want to thank the folks at Brattleboro Community Television who will be helping us get this on the air later. Jill and Becca,
That was really fun.
thank you so
Olga.
much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.